Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I'd like to thank Eric Lee and the Kimbell Art Museum staff, without whom we could not have done this. And I want to thank you for coming. I'm sure you've been hearing late night hosts going on about what a joy it is to have a live audience. I'm in radio. It's always a joy to have a live audience. But thank you particularly. This has been wonderful. This is our return to live panel discussions like this. We appreciate those of you who watched it virtually, but it's a different experience, isn't it? And in particular tonight is I think a very interesting discussion about a kind of turning point, potential turning point in Fort Worth culture. Before I introduce the panel, there are a couple of guests this evening I'd like to introduce. They're from KERA. The first one is our brand new collaborations editor, Juan Antonio Ramos. He's significant because he is based here and he is working with KERA and the Fort Worth Report, so we expand our coverage of this city. I'd also like to introduce the new executive editor at KERA, Gilbert Balon. His previous post was being editor-in-chief of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, but he has deep roots here. He started in the Star-Telegram, and I knew him 25 years ago at the Dallas Morning News. So he is returning to his roots coming here. I'd also like to introduce the Vice President of Arts for KERA, Ann Bothwell. And now to our panel. Dr. John Barnett Jr. is a pediatric dentist. He's a native of Fort Worth, but he worked for years in New Orleans. He became the president of the Louisiana Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. He was an associate professor at LSU School of Dentistry for 20 years. It was Hurricane Katrina that brought him back here in 2005. And with his art collection, he has a fondness for the Harlem Renaissance. He is also co-chair of the steering committee of the new Fort Worth Museum of Art, Fort Worth African American Museum and Cultural Center. Dr. John Burnett. Thank you. Adam McKinney was a dancer with the celebrated Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. He currently is a professor of dance at TCU. Along with his husband, Daniel Banks, he is co-chair of DNA Works, which uses art for healing, and he is a founding board member of Transform 1012 North Main, the collaborative effort to repurpose the old Ku Klux Klan Hall on the north side. Adam McKinney. Dion Sims is a past president of Fort Worth Association of Federated Women's Clubs. She is the founder and president of Unity Unlimited Incorporated, a nonprofit that encourages people through collaboration and education, enriching their lives. She is also the founding executive director of the National Juneteenth Museum, where she works with her mother, Opal Lee. Dione Sims. And I have the pleasure of introducing a Nobel Prize nominee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, Ms. Opal Lee. Now, I believe people have probably heard about a number of these organizations, but they've heard the name, maybe not much else. They're kind of confused as to what are they, what is the relationship. So what I'd like you to do, and I'd like to start with at the end with Dr. Barnett, is give me your elevator pitch. Tell people in the most succinct, direct fashion what this organization that you're starting is going to do.
The hardest part is the elevator pitch. But the goal of our museum endeavor is to present African American history, which is a part of American history. So I really need to say to present American history from the African American perspective. Our goal is to include fixed exhibits as well as visiting exhibits. But we added to the African American Museum the term cultural center, because it is our desire to add the performing arts and other kinetic expressions of African American history. But we cannot tell African American history without telling how it was a part or is a part of American history. And our vision for that endeavor is bringing people together through telling our stories. Bringing people together through telling our stories.
Adam, if you could tell us about the Fred Rouse Center for the Arts and Cultural Healing.
Thank you, I'd be happy to. And this elevator ride might be on the Empire State Building. Transform 1012 North Main Street is a coalition and community-based nonprofit organization that is transforming the former Ku Klux Klan auditorium on Main Street into what will be known as the Fred Rouse Center for Arts and Community Healing, named after Mr. Fred Rouse, who was the victim of a racial terror lynching here in Fort Worth on December 11th, 1921. The center radically transforms a place dedicated to hate and injustice into a space reclaimed for communal care, healing, and creativity. Transform 1012 North Main Street is an organization of 8 other organizations, including DNA Works, Daniel Banks, the Wellman Project, Vanessa Barker and Taylor Willis, Sol Ballet Folklorico, Freddie Cantu and Roman Ramirez, Window to Your World, Aisha Ganguly, LGBTQ Saves, Sharon Herrera, the 1012 Youth Council, Jacora Johnson, Dr. Opal Lee and the Opal Lee Foundation, myself as representative of Tarrant County Coalition for Peace and Justice, and Frederick Rouse III, who's here this evening, representing the Rouse families.
Thank you. Dion, National Juneteenth Museum.
The National Juneteenth Museum's purpose is to help all of America be able to find themselves in the Juneteenth story. And what that means is it's a story of freedom. And so our goal is to connect the stories of the enslaved so that we can find the freedom in modern day liberation. What we gain by accepting the fact that the slaves had something to be freed from is a fact that we now have to protect those freedoms in today's society, so Juneteenth becomes relevant and not just something that happened in the past. So our goal is to make sure that whenever freedom came across the U.S., that we share the story so that people can know that freedom is about today. It's not just about what happened. And so in connecting the story of freedom for the enslaved to today's liberation, we again know that today we're not free. And so freedom isn't a past tense situation. And so the National Juneteenth isn't just about Texas. It's not just about Black people, but it's about everybody who helped, the Quakers, the abolitionists, and now we're understanding about the Southern Underground Railroad into Mexico. So now our Latin brothers get to rejoice with us, the freedom of the enslaved. So the National Juneteenth is going to tell the narrative of freedom all across America.
Thank you. Thank you. Now that people have some understanding of the 3 different organizations, if you could each give us a kind of quick status report. That is, we're talking about an idea, a dream, becoming an organization, becoming potentially a building, a center, and that's a years-long process. So where are you now in that process? Designs, funding, finding a site? Where are you now in that process? Dr. Barnett?
Well, we've kind of organically arrived at where we are in this vision. It started out as a project or an endeavor to use the Butler Place housing development. It was going to be reused, and the historical significance of that site was not wanting to be lost. And so a committee came out of the Butler Place housing project redevelopment, and it was decided that we needed to use or have or not lose the historical perspective of that site. And so a committee was formed and called the Steering Committee, which is now morphed into the African American Museum and Cultural Center Committee. And we have started our process of developing this museum first by, I guess in late 2021 in November, we had a workshop where we invited, I think it was 6 art experts from really around the country. Most of them were from the East Coast, but we had some from Dallas. And we had interviews with stakeholders to tell us what they would like to see in an African American museum in Fort Worth. That process went through with about 100 stakeholders, and they identified those things that were important to them. And from that workshop, 5 sites were identified as to where this African American museum could be located. We then took those 5 sites and we employed or engaged the Urban Land Institute, which went about the process of vetting those sites as far as their compatibility to house our African American Museum and Cultural Center. 3 sites were selected on the south side and 2 sites in the Cultural District. Recommendations came from that committee, and we are now in the process of using the preferences that they indicated based on their criteria to set up interviews with stakeholders to see how they feel about the top 2 preference sites. This is a project that is of the people, for the people, by the people. And so we have not made any decisions as far as site. We all have visions on the committee, but we're committed to trusting the process. We're committed to being, to adhere to the process of making sure that this is not our idea, but it is an idea that the public will support and have buy-in. So we have gone from a committee, loose committee, to now a steering committee, and we've just submitted our documents to become a 501c3 entity so that we can then go, and our next goal, having those sites selected or their preference sites selected, we're now looking at doing a feasibility study after we do additional stakeholder interviews to see what the feeling is about the preference sites that were identified to us through the Urban Land Institute study. They took maybe 2 to 3 months to do that, did a very thorough vetting. And so we're just going methodically down this process, trusting the process, making sure that the community is involved in every aspect of it so that we can have a representation of what Fort Worth wants and Greater Tarrant County wants to see this story of African American history presented. And so that's where we are now. We've gotten the Urban Land Institute's recommendation. We have set 2 dates to have stakeholder interviews, and we will take that information along with validating a site and move to a feasibility study so that then we can bring that back and present it to you as the public, present it to our city council, and move to the next step. But we're just methodical in it. This is a slow process, but I think slow is better than quick decisions. And so we're just trusting the process, and it's an exciting. But we came to this point through an organic movement that started with the Butler Housing Project, Butler Place, and now we're at the point of stakeholder and going into a feasibility study.
Adam, you have a building and a site. And so I was wondering if you could tell us where you are with, this is the Ellis Pecan building, the former Ku Klux Klan auditorium on North Main.
I think it's important to also look back to history to answer this question. And so I'm thinking about the West African Adinkra symbol, the Sankofa, who teaches us to go back and get it. And I think the ancestors mean history for sure. And I also think that the ancestors mean each other in the process of going back. And so this building was built in 1924, 1925, and housed KKK meetings and initiations and performances. And performance was used as a way to instill racist ideologies. After the ownership changed hands, it was then known as the North Main Street Auditorium, and there were professional wrestling matches, dance marathon tournaments, and then it became the Leonard Brothers warehouse, department store warehouse, and then the Ellis Pecan building was purchased in 2004 by Sugar Plum Holdings. And in 2019, a certificate of appropriateness for demolition came through the Historic and Cultural Landmarks Commission through the city of Fort Worth. And Daniel Banks, who's also here this evening, and I were privy to that information and met with the committee and communicated that we felt that it was inappropriate to demolish the building for fear that we would forget what happened here. And so in 2019, we developed the 1012 Leadership Coalition and then became a nonprofit that year. In 2021, we received a grant to purchase the building. Transform 1012 North Main Street now owns the building. We've received funding through the Ford Foundation, through the Mellon Foundation, through the National Endowment for the Arts. We are picking up a check for $3 million through the House Appropriations Committee next week. And then we'll be going through a community design process. Like you, Dr. Barnett, our process is slow. It takes time to heal. We shouldn't rush the process. Similarly, we need stakeholder feedback to ensure that healing happens. Like I said, we're doing a capital campaign, raising about $35 million, $30 million for construction costs, and $5 million for the design costs. And we hope to open in, well, we're set to open in 2025, which marks 100 years since the opening of the original iteration of the building. And I'll just say that I spoke to the importance of and the power of performance. And Dion, you spoke about liberation. And we feel that with this building, not only do we have an opportunity to transform the space, but we also have an opportunity to transform our relationships with one another. It's a performance of healing and liberation that we feel is totally possible. There are enough resources here in Fort Worth for the healing to occur. And we believe that it is important to support each other's projects, and that there is room for each other's projects to ensure that healing can happen.
Thank you. Dion, if you can explain how we came from Dr. Opal Lee walking across the country to make Juneteenth a national holiday to making it a national museum.
Certainly. I think we have to understand that the National Juneteenth Museum is being birthed out of a natural desire for Miss Opal, who has a Juneteenth museum on the corner of Evans and Rosedale now, and has had it almost 20 years, out of her passion for what Juneteenth stands for, which is freedom. And it was her goal to make sure Fort Worth celebrated Juneteenth, come hell or high water, for the last almost 45 years, when it was reintroduced here in Fort Worth in the 70s. And so as she continued to champion for Juneteenth locally, being recruited by Dr. Ronald Myers of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, she was able to see the world, this country, really needed to understand what Juneteenth was about. So she was recruited as a part of making it a national holiday. Again, in 2016, at 89, when she decided that she hadn't done enough, bless us, to bring awareness to Juneteenth, because making it a holiday was taking a long time. She didn't understand what was so hard about it. She just had a marketing, brainstorm that if somebody saw her walking at 89 years old, surely, they would hurry up and make Juneteenth a national holiday. Didn't happen in 2016 after she finished her walk. 2019, she picked it back up, and in 2020, we issued the online campaign to make Juneteenth a national holiday. We got 1.5 million signatures in that vein, and in 2021, of course, we now have a holiday. I get the phone call, Dion Sims, yes, this is the White House. We would like to have Miss Opal here tomorrow for the signing of the legislation. Sure thing, gonna get her there. But I think that having Juneteenth as a national museum in the state of Texas begs the question, well, isn't Juneteenth about Galveston? Isn't that where Juneteenth happened? And yes, for Texas, freedom came, emancipation came in Galveston on the 19th of June. But when you talk about doing a national Juneteenth museum, you have to look at where Juneteenth came across the country. And there are 4 distinct times that it happened, right? Emancipation Proclamation, June 19th for us. But the border states that were not impacted by the states that were in rebellion, they didn't get it until the ratification of the 13th Amendment in December of 1865. But yet still in Oklahoma, where the Indian territories existed, we had to do treaties with them, and that wasn't until June of 1866. So when Texas said for years we were the last to know, that's not true. So accuracy in telling the story about Juneteenth is really what the National Museum is going to focus on. And so in that vein, when we were talking through, and even before the holiday happened, we had already been planning on doing some economic development on her property. Sabre Groups came, and we talked with Jared Howard about bringing economic development to the South Side, and what would that look like? And she asked Mr. Howard, do you have land for what you want to do? And he said, no, I really want it to be, on the South Side. And she says, well, now you do. And so that piece of land at the corner of Evans and Rosedale, it's three lots that it originally started out, has now grown to being the whole block. And so the National Juneteenth Museum will house not only the museum, which is our anchor, but bring economic development to that area of town. And so it will have housing, it will have a food hall, because it's kind of like a food court that's happening. It would have incubator space so that we now have the ability to bring entrepreneurs into a place where they can grow and bring economic development, as well as the museum itself. So with that comes now bringing the nation to Fort Worth so that they can see their history story told. Because with our permanent exhibits, one being the 12 Freedoms Gained, as one of our permanent exhibits, it talks about the things that we take for granted today as a freedom that the previously enslaved did not have. The ability to read and write, the ability to marry who you want to, the ability to have your children name them and not have them taken away, the freedom to dress the way you want to worship the way you want to own business, to own property and not be property. These are freedoms that we see as every day, that's how it's supposed to be, but then it wasn't. And so we've got to protect those freedoms. And so the exhibits inside the National Juneteenth Museum aren't just about Texas. It's about us as a people. It's about understanding that freedom isn't free. So you got to be able to serve in the military. Previously enslaved couldn't serve in the military. They couldn't vote. They couldn't legislate and govern. So all of these are freedoms that we're going to highlight inside of the National Juneteenth Museum. And so right now we are in our quiet phase of capital campaign building. We do have the land that's going to make up the footprint of the development. We do have a lot of community support. We did take the time to talk to, as Dr. Barnett says, the stakeholders that are in the South Side, the historic South Side, and talked about what did they want to see in a development on this property. And I think the one thing that's amazing to see is that part of our city is hungry for attention. It is hungry for development to come because it's been promised a long time. We did get the Evans Plaza, we did get Chamblee, but it kind of got sidetracked. And so when we are now able to bring economic development to the South Side with a benefactor that believes in what we've done, we've now been able to acquire, like I said, acquire the land. We've also got the architect renderings for a fabulous edifice that's going to be there, not just the museum, but the housing component, the building component, the retail space. And so we've got a lot invested in building and rebuilding because if we remember, Evans and Rosedale was the center of commerce in Black Fort Worth back in the day. And we want to bring that spirit back. So you're going to get a chance to be a part of the capital campaign. We're going to launch the 619, and that means 619 in any denomination you want to do it. 6.19 million, 619,000, 100,000. I mean, just whatever it is. And also the $6.19, not going to leave anybody out. All right, don't think that your contribution is going to be too small, but what it is it gives everybody a chance, like I said, to find themselves in the Juneteenth story. We've got an awesome architect that has, and if anybody's been to any of the meetings that we've had, I think we just finished one in early April on the 8th, where we got to show you the renderings and the drawings, how phenomenal it is. You guys are going to be proud to call Fort Worth home, and the nation's going to be proud to call it the National Juneteenth Museum, and we're excited about where we are. But we are in the campaign phase. We've got, now, my brothers on the left have time on their hands. We've got this one right here that keeps poking us in the back. She is 95. And so our goal is to have it built for Juneteenth, June 19, 2024, to have the campus erected so that we can celebrate Juneteenth with her in 2024. So we know it's aggressive. but it's our desire to let the world know that a holiday is one thing, all right? That's a one day, but we need to celebrate freedom 365, and that's what our goal is.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a kind of a toss-up question, and that when I've talked to people about these three projects, and mentioned things like the Kinfolk House, the artist Cedric Huckabee, Letitia Huckabee's, their community arts project, which has just opened last month, and that these are also in the works. The question becomes, why now? What happened? Is it a case of Fort Worth, the African-American community, reaching a particular state? This is something, there's enough interest, enough wealth. Why now all three here? Or is it just pure coincidence?
I think it's timing. I think it's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to reflect on history in and of itself. I think one of the things that's critical is to understand that right now, history is trying to be rewritten and it's trying to be erased. And so the more opportunity we have to show what really happened, so that as my grandmother says, we can heal from it, which is, again, what Dr. McKinney is talking about. You can't heal from what you don't find diagnosed. You don't get, to just take placebo pills to think it's going to make something go away. And so the more we can talk about it and get comfortable with history, it happened, it's not going away. And so I think the neat thing about it is it can be positive. I think one thing that folks are trying to do is saying, well, bringing all this up is negative and it's blame gaming and naming. It's not. It's about acknowledgement. When you talk about the 12 steps in the Alcoholic Anonymous, first thing is you got to admit it. And I think that's been the hardest part, is admitting that history existed and not whitewashed and changed. Young people coming up, again, they're talking about, the Holocaust, and a lot of those folks are dying off. I mean, they are. And so the Holocaust museums have been about retaining that history. It's not about, the hurt and the thing, but about remembering. And we talk about commemorating. And that's what all of these projects are about, is so that we don't forget, because if you forget, you can repeat. And we don't want to have to live through that again. So the timing is just right for us to make sure we don't forget. And when you have three distinct projects that are going to enlighten, educate, it's just time.
Taking off of something Diane said, I want to address this question to Adam. I have a son who is an art therapist in Seattle, and so he's a licensed, degreed therapist. You speak of using art for healing, and Dion spoke about remembering, preserving. Are there other ways that you use art for healing? What do you hope to do with the Fred Rouse Center for cultural healing?
I think it's important to tell the truth. Yesterday was Holocaust Remembrance Day. Tomorrow, Tarrant County Coalition for Peace and Justice at 2 p.m. will be installing a historical marker at the former city and county hospital to commemorate the abduction, the racial terror abduction of Mr. Fred Rouse from that location, 330 East 4th Street. Hope to see you there. I think coming together as a community through the arts, that is, through performance, through telling our stories as a way to resist histories of segregation and the effects of racism, because we have all been racialized, independent of our phenotype, that is our hair texture and our skin color, that we've all been horribly affected. And we believe that by using the arts, and I'm speaking as co-director of DNA Works in particular, we have a way to enter these conversations as a soft entrance, and also to envision what might be possible. Because I often think that when we get hurt, we can only think so far. That the answers and the solutions are just this far because of what has happened historically to us. And so our hope is to use the arts as a way to kind of see through the impediments. And like I said, I think on the other side is one another. And to answer your question, Jerome, around why now, my answer is why not now? Now is the perfect time for 3 distinct and connected projects that center people of the global majority and Blackness to be centered here in Fort Worth, to participate in the national conversation around reconciliation. I fear that Fort Worth would be left behind. And I think it's important now, as we move in the direction of each other and healing, to join that national and international conversation.
Dr. Barnett, I realize it's early days, but we're speaking of history, and you were speaking of history. Does your committee have a sense of the scope? What is it that you will include? Is it going to be a national museum? Is it a history of Fort Worth African American culture and history? Do you have a frame for what you hope to put inside this?
Well, I think we need to tell the history. I think, to use a familiar phrase, our society is in an inflection point. I think democracy, as we know it, is threatened. There's an existential threat against democracy. We live in a post-truth era. Truth is now subjective. Truth is whether you agree with it or not. And I think that if we don't come together, we're going to lose our democracy, because now there's so much subjectivity in what we choose to believe that we're being divided. The chasm is growing wider, it's not closing. Being a healthcare provider, and I'm sure all of you who've gone to your healthcare providers, the first thing they do is take a history. Before they will treat you, before they can tell you how to heal, they have to know what your history is. We no longer want to embrace our history, as if our children, or if we are so sensitive to hearing the truth of American history that we're trying to change what our historical lineage has brought us to. I think American democracy, the exceptionalism of American democracy, is an evolving process. We have to go back to the vision of our founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson, in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them being life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness." Thomas Jefferson lived during a time where racism and segregation and slavery was the accepted norm. Yet he had the vision to quote that all men are created equal. We have reached that time in this great experiment of American democracy where if we don't face the truth, where if we are so willing to have our way that we will take our brother down. We live in the United States of America. We cannot live separated from each other. We have to come together. Unity is a part of what makes us special. And so when I look at our willingness to hide our history, how can we grow and how can we heal? And so when I look at this museum, it is a way to tell the story of America. It is a way to get us back to where we can be tolerant of each other. Change is a hard thing to embrace. we first have to challenge the status quo so that we can restructure our beliefs, so that then we can be transformed by the revelation that comes. It says, seek the truth, for the truth shall set you free. Everybody wants to come to America because democracy is a dynamic form of government and existence, but we play with it like it's a toy, like one segment of our society can rule for the rest of us. That's just not so. That's not the country we live in. And as I sense what is happening in Fort Worth, I think we are in a unique position to grasp change and to bring these entities into Fort Worth and to be an example for the United States and the world to see that we are different here in Fort Worth, that we have come to a point where we can say that we will make the change and we will not be selfish to our own desires, not reflecting who we are as a people. And so I think there is a spiritual component to why these three entities are where they are at this point in time. We organically came to this point. As I listen to the other entities, they have evolved. But sometimes the favorite quote of mine is from Martin Luther King that says, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. You know, I know we're changing. Sometimes you don't see change when you're in the middle of it. I grew up on the north side, 3 blocks from the stockyards, when Swift and Armour were actually working stockyards. And there was one movie theater called the Isis there. When I was a kid, we couldn't go in the front door of the Isis. We had to go up the sideway and get our popcorn out of a different machine and sit in the balcony. Well, if you ask me, has Fort Worth changed? I now, at 74 years old, could go, I have not yet, in the front door of the Isis. Has that been a change? Yes. Did I know it when it was happening? No. We have to commit to principles. We have to embrace what will allow us to have the capacity to change. We have to be transformed. We can't transform ourselves. Our human natures are too deprived for us to do justice to ourselves, but we have to commit to the principles of change. And I think this is a time in the history of Fort Worth. This is a time in the history of Tarrant County when we are ready for what opportunity that this presents. And so as I look at these entities, and there are so many questions swirling around, why 3, why now? Because I think Fort Worth is ready for now. I think the people of Fort Worth, even though we struggle against ourselves, have a thread that I grew up under that defies description. We are ready. The opportunity is here for us to grasp. Let us not pick it apart. Let us embrace it for what it is. It's divine in nature. It is not brought on by any grand scheme outside of God's timing. And so we are in an inflection point. And I think we will answer the call. And I think the voices that seek to selfishly divide us will be overwhelmed by the spirit of those who know we can't make it without each other. It's our time. This is the time. This is the day. And we're caught up in a movement that goes beyond our human effort. We're being moved by our destiny. And I see it manifesting in small ways. But when will we know it? My children will know it when they look back. If we are ashamed of who we have been, what will our children look back and say of us now? For the presence that we live in is the history of our children. We can look at examples all around our city and see that we need sensitivity. Our schools are full of examples of where we are killing ourselves through not wanting to show love, which we have the capacity for. And so I think it's more than an accident that we are where we are in our evolution of manifesting the vision of our forefathers, who did it when this was more alien to them than it is to us now. We cannot keep our children from relating to each other. We cannot think that our children are so delicate they cannot hear the truth. We grow from the truth. We don't wither away. We've never withered away as Americans. And all of us are Americans. We're one of the few nations in the world who doesn't have one nationality as their foundation. You become an American when you are born here. And it is the great challenge that I think that we can overcome if we will embrace this unique experiment and put aside our differences and love each other. You know, as a dentist, I don't treat black teeth, white teeth, brown teeth, yellow teeth. We are more alike than we are apart, than we are different. If you go and get an operation, the physician is going to operate on each of you the same. They're not going to operate on a white person, a black person, a Hispanic. We are all alike. But in that sense, we're all alike in our tribalism. So I don't ever fault people for feeling like they feel. I think I have felt prejudice, but I fight against it. It is your normal inclination. Don't condemn yourself because you feel differently. Embrace any opportunity that will allow us to come into unity together. Is this not the opportunity? Is this not the time that is ordained for us to reach and to become one? Our pure existence depends on our willingness to look beyond ourselves and love our brothers as ourselves. I think Fort Worth is ready for that. I think that's who we are in this city. I think that it can be manifested and healing can be manifested, but it can't be manifested if we're afraid to embrace our past. Time for us to act on what God is putting us to do. He's given us the strength. There's no doubt in my mind about it. And you know it too. Embrace it. This is our time.
Before we open up to audience questions, I have one question for you, Dr. Opal. Dion spoke about you wanting to see this museum open, the National Juneteenth Museum open in 2 years. What do you want to see in it?
When or what?
What? What do you want to see? What would you wish most for this museum?
I don't know whether I'm going to go off on a tangent or not. You need to know that I belong to all three of these. And I treat them like I do the children I raised. They grow, some of them faster than others. They have some who need more attention than others. But it doesn't mean you don't love them all the same. Sure. And what we have here are groups that are going to make Fort Worth a Mecca. And they need and so you're asking me what I want?
What do you hope to see? What do you want to see most?
I want each one of these groups to come to fruition as quickly as they can. And I think it's for a selfish reason. I want to see what it's like. Yes, I do. And so, what is happening with the African American Museum, it's going to take its time, and it's going to be premier. 1012 North Main is, with all of the groups that are going to be a part of it, you cannot believe how people will not flock to see what goes on there. And the National Juneteenth Museum as the young people say, it's off the chain. Fort Worth cannot do without either one of them. Its time has come for us to have what each one of these has to offer so that we can understand that if we don't know where we've been, we don't know where we're going. And heaven knows we need to know where we're going. We need to embrace each other. And I tell people, make yourself a committee of one. You know somebody who's not on the same page you are on. Change their minds, because their minds can be changed. It's not going to happen in a day or so. Not going to happen in a week. But you can change their minds to the fact that it is important that freedom is for everyone. And we aren't free yet. We have too much homelessness, too much joblessness, the climate change that we are responsible for because we don't take care of our earth. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I got to get this out. I say climate change, if we don't do something about our earth, we all going to hell in a handbasket. Because it's our responsibility. We can't depend on the government or somebody else. Each of us is responsible for what happens. And I don't think we have to have some big affair. Tiny things, little things. If you help an old person like myself across the street, or take me to the store, or take me to get my groceries, or a mother who has children, and you could keep the kids while she goes to the store. Small things. If you just smile at somebody, all these things add up to our becoming one people. And that's what we're going to have to do. Because what happened in the past, our young people aren't going to stand it, and it's not going to happen again. And that's why these three entities are important to this city and this state and this nation. And I plan to be here to see them.
We're going to have some quick questions from the audience. We have 2 microphones. If you raise your hand, we can raise the light so we can see, and someone can bring the microphone to you if any of you have questions for our panel.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here today and for all the projects you're working on. They're really going to transform this city, and I think this nation as well. I was interested to hear more. I know a lot of you used the term stakeholders, and I was hoping maybe you could speak a little bit more about who are the people you're engaging, how are you engaging them, and what does that process look like?
So for the National Juneteenth Museum that will be on the corner of Evans and Rosedale, the stakeholders that we spoke to were the folks that live in that area. So we've got the historic South Side of the historic Turrell Avenue Neighborhood Association. We've talked to the business community. We've talked to the city. We've talked with the arts councils as well. So they all have a part to play in not only supporting what we're doing, but also we talk to the national museums across the country to let us know what we need to make sure when you talk about doing a national implementation, just what does that mean? And so we make sure that the states that have Juneteenth or freedom celebrations, because that was one of the reasons why it took so long for Juneteenth to become a national holiday, is we have always relegated it just to Texas and just to our story. And so once we were able to elevate it past Texas, now the other states aren't threatened by having a national Juneteenth holiday because they understand it's going to be where we celebrate freedom all across. So the stakeholders for us as a national museum included others in other states that celebrate Juneteenth, and for the ones up north that really didn't, it's now helping them to find themselves in the freedom story. So again, up north we had Quakers, and so we're reaching out to those entities. We had the abolitionist societies of the north that will be, their stories will be told inside the Juneteenth Museum. So our stakeholders are a bit broader in that perspective, in that we're talking to those other entities as well as the local entities where it's going to be housed. So those were our stakeholders.
That's similar for Transform 1012 North Main Street. We've been in conversation with city leaders as well. Transform 1012 North Main Street is part of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. And those are sites that have histories of oppression, like the Fifth Floor Museum, the Kigali Genocide Memorial, and many, many others. What's specific about Transform 1012 North Main Street is that the site is already there, and there are people who are experiencing homelessness and houselessness who are living in the building. Those are stakeholders. Right, and so we're trying to be really intentional around what does it mean to change ownership? What does it mean to engage people who are already there? You know, as we think about building a state-of-the-art performance space and a farmer's market and an artisan's market, and including low-income housing and thinking about economic development, that our stakeholders are broad and vast and are from someone who's already living in the building to national leaders.
We also included that same stakeholder base. We included the religious community as far as different ministerial organizations, social organizations, business people, a lot of citizens. We tried to involve people from different areas of the city because we're trying to decide what their vision is and what would they want to have. And so we tried to be as diverse in our stakeholder interview. One of the things that came out of our stakeholder interview is that the population doesn't want the Fort Worth African American Museum and Cultural Center to be a side wing of the Kimbells. We feel our story is just as valid as the museums that are in the cultural district. As a matter of fact, we feel that there is an exchange of education between having our story being told next to every other ethnic story of America. And so we interviewed everyone who could give us some input, because we cannot do this in a small group. We need to have buy-in. This needs to be representative of what your will is for this project. And so we interviewed 100 stakeholders, and I don't have the list, but you're welcome to come if you'd like to. We have not turned away anyone. Private citizens are activists, our community liaisons are good. But we try to, in our knowledge and in our breadth of knowledge, try to include as a wider diversity and inclusion as we could, so that we would know what the community of Fort Worth desires, whether they want it located. And so there were a lot of ideas, but mainly what came out is that we want a museum that we can be proud of. We want a museum that is equal to the other representations of American culture. And so we took all of that and that kind of guided. We're being guided by you. We move as you direct us to move, because for our museum to be successful, you're going to have buy-in. And believe me, our dreams are big. We look for this not to be subservient to any other museum in the United States. As a matter of fact, we're about to take a tour to look at the National Museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C., to look at the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit, and to look at the new museum in Montgomery, Alabama. These are some notable museums in the United States. Our vision for Fort Worth is to surpass what is already existing. You'll be proud of what we're going to do. But we need to know and make sure that we incorporate as much as feasible what your desire is to see. But we don't want to be a part of another museum. We don't want to go turn left and you'll go to it. We want to be represented because we think this is our contribution. And it is not about educating Black people. It's about educating the community so that we can come together. Another Martin Luther King quote says, we hate each other because we fear each other. We fear each other because we don't communicate with each other. We don't communicate with each other because we separate ourselves. We need to be where there can be an interchange of awareness of individual cultures. An African American museum will heal. All of these projects will heal. And as I said, healing doesn't occur on its own. It needs to be challenged, needs to have the beliefs restructured, and then you need to allow yourself to be transformed by that process. And so we have high hopes of what this is going to do, but we need you to do it, to support all three of these institutions. We're trying to make you proud. Give us a chance.
One of the great things about holding the public panels here is there's a reception waiting for us upstairs, but only till 7:30. So I can pick another question or I can tell you, let's go upstairs. I don't see any other hands. Let's thank our panel. And we'll see you upstairs. Thank you very much.